Rob Liefeld enjoyed extreme success in the early 1990s with his work and was considered to be one of the great rock star artists of the 1990s. However, Rob Liefeld has developed a reputation of being one of the worst comic book artists in the history of comic books. Some have even considered him to be the worst thing to happen to comic books since Frederick Wertham, being a reference to the psychologist who in the 1950s wrote about the harmful effects of comic books on young people. Now, whether you like Rob Liefeld or you hate him, no one can argue with the success that he's had. If Rob Liefeld is such a bad artist, what can his success be attributed to? We'll find out today. Hello all of my fellow comic book fans, this is Dante D and welcome to my channel where we talk about comic books and other geek stuff. Today we're really going to discuss if Rob Liefeld is a bad artist. The short answer of it, well, yes and no. So in order to understand if Rob Liefeld is a good artist or not, we really have to look at why he is considered a bad artist. Well, Rob Liefeld is really known for his over-exaggerated anatomy, his objectifying of women, his use of way too many accessories and giant guns, and his inability to draw according to proper human proportions. Rob Liefeld has also been blamed by Bob Layton, the former editor-in-chief of Valiant Comics, for single-handedly ending the speculator boom of the early 1990s due to Rob Liefeld's constant missing of deadlines, thereby leading to his comic books being released super late. Barry Windsor Smith, another prominent comic book artist, had this to say about Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld has nothing to offer. It's as plain as bacon on your plate. He has nothing to offer. He cannot draw, he can't write. He's a young boy almost, I would expect, whose culture is bubblegum wrappers, Saturday morning cartoons, Marvel Comics. That's his culture. Somebody was at his house and came back with a report. There is not a single book in his house. Only comic books. I see nothing in his work that allows me to even guess that there's any depth involved in that person that might come to the forgiven time. Wow, that's a lot of hate for Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld created two extremely popular characters in the 1990s, Cable and Deadpool, and he is responsible for the second highest selling single issue of a comic book of all time. That, of course, is X-Force #1, which is estimated to have sold at least 5 million copies. This guy is still considered to be one of the most successful artists in comic book history. Why is that? Well, the answer to that question is Generation X. Generation X? I thought this was a comic book video. Yes, Generation X. In order to understand the success of Rob Liefeld, you first have to understand Generation X and the attitudes that were very prevalent at the time that Rob Liefeld was super popular. Generation X is the generation that directly succeeds the baby boom generation. It's often debated what the years of birth were for Gen Xers, but it's generally agreed upon that Gen X is sometime around the mid-60s all the way to the early 1980s. Gen Xers were born in an era of significant social change and shifting societal values. We're talking about kids that literally lived the civil rights movements of the late 1960s and the early 1970s. During this time, there also was a greater focus on adults and individual adult achievement. The 1950s was considered to be the era of the cult of the child. The cult of the child era is perfectly illustrated by the whole debacle with Frederick Wertham's seduction of the innocent and the worry about the effects that comic books were having on children. Well, the late 1960s and the 70s were considered to be the cult of the adult. There was a greater focus on adults and their individual achievements. Adults were going back to school. They were focusing on their education, getting better jobs. Their views on marriage also changed during this generation as divorce rates skyrocketed. Gen Xers were also the first generation to see divorced parents bringing new sexual partners into the house. Generation X was also called the latchkey generation, which is a reference to a lot of kids needing to go to latchkey during this time, as there was greater maternal participation in the workforce. With your parents divorced or both mom and dad working, you spent more time at latchkey and you spent more time with your peers. Generation X was also a time in the United States where there was less funding being given to social programs for children and more funding being given to programs for the elderly. This generation was also called the Mtv Generation, which refers to these kids spending so much time watching MTV and music videos in the absence of parents. So all these factors here led to Gen Xers being a generation of young people who were very disaffected, cynical, and angry. Rob Liefeld himself is a Gen Xer being born in 1967. So you basically could say that the success of Rob Liefeld is a result of those Gen X attitudes at the time, those angry, cynical attitudes. And you definitely could see that Rob Liefeld was a Gen Xer by the way his art was. His art was so frustrated, so angry, and so loud. Just imagine, young people and teenagers at the time reading Rob Liefeld's stuff were seeing these big, bulging, muscular characters with these giant guns who always really looked angry. They really could identify with these characters because they likely were feeling the same types of emotions themselves. Not to mention that in the late 80s and 90s, people really liked muscles and big guns. We can definitely see that in those cult 80s and 90s action films. Rob Liefeld himself even attributes his own success to his ability to tap into the zeitgeist at the time. He says, "I'll be the first to tell you that we, the Image Collective, were never the best artists. We were never the best at anything. But just like a song or a band or whatever, we caught on and we toured rigorously." Still not convinced? I'm going to challenge you with a little experiment. Let me introduce you to another famous Gen Xer who just coincidentally was born the same year as Rob Liefeld in 1967. Yes, I'm talking about Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, is considered to be the voice of a generation, the voice of Generation X. He rose to this status with his very disassociated and angry lyrics, which many music lovers at the time could identify with. Now here's my challenge. I want you to pick up a Rob Liefeld comic book and I want you to read it while listening to Nirvana. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Heart-Shaped Box, pretty much any angry Nirvana song will work. At the end of this experiment, maybe you will see just what Rob Liefeld's appeal really was. So let's get back to our original question. Is Rob Liefeld a bad artist with his big guns, big muscles, and little feet? Well, if you looked at Rob Liefeld's work without really understanding the cultural context behind it, yeah, you could probably say that there are better artists out there with Rob Liefeld's lack of proportion, over-exaggeration, and all his little accessories and little feet. Me personally, I think that Rob Liefeld is a genius. If Kurt Cobain was the voice of a generation, I think Rob Liefeld was the pen of a generation. I think he was brilliant to be able to tap into the cultural attitudes of the time and be able to incorporate them into his work so his readers could identify with his work more. This, my friends, is what the appeal of Rob Liefeld really is. So, Rob Liefeld, yay or nay? What do you think? Do you like him? Do you hate him? Why? Let me know in the comments. If you really like this video, please do not leave this page without subscribing to my channel for new videos posted weekly on topics relating to geek culture. Until next time, this is Dante D signing out. See y'all later.